We imagine cities among the stars. What we will build are constellations of worlds. Humanity may one day build 1 billion new worlds, not by terraforming alien planets, but by assembling them, piece by piece, in the void. But just like we rarely build a single house without a road, a neighbor, or a community, our space habitats may not be solitary wanderers. They may be parts of greater wholes, living clusters, orbital tapestries, civilizations among the stars, not scattered but woven together. Today, to celebrate the 11th anniversary of our very first episode, Megastructures in Science and Science Fiction, we will explore the future of space habitat clusters and conglomerations, from simple daisy chains of O'Neill cylinders to vast modular megastructures bristling with life and purpose. We will look at why these habitats come together, how they share energy, culture, and security, and what strange new shapes our homes among the stars might take. Because when you have the power to build worlds, the next question becomes, how do you connect them? Why clustered habitats? When most people imagine a space habitat, they picture a lone cylinder or a torus drifting serenely through the void, like a futuristic Noah's Ark set against a backdrop of stars. But just a single house doesn't make a city, or even a village. Most space habitats won't be lonely pioneers orbiting in isolation. They'll come in clusters, networks, and constellations, sprawling living archipelagos in the sea of space. And there are good reasons for that. First, there's logistical efficiency. Space habitats are likely to need routine shipments of materials, whether it's raw carbon from a nearby asteroid, replacement parts from a fab station, or any number of specialized items that can be created more efficiently in a dedicated factory or farm somewhere than by a local 3D printer. Grouping habitats allows shared infrastructure, dedicated freight lines, tethered maglev tracks, or even shared solar beam arrays or communication relays. Energy can be harvested collectively and distributed on demand across the cluster, smoothing over surges and outages. Second, there's safety in numbers. Space is vast and hostile. A lone station might face dangers with only its onboard crew and resources, but a cluster can respond as a community, routing emergency services from one station to another, whether it's firefighting drones, replacement air tanks, or even mobile habitats doubling as rescue vessels. Third, communication and culture thrive in proximity. The speed of light may be fast, but even a 1-second delay becomes noticeable in conversation, and unbearable for anything truly collaborative. A densely packed cluster of habitats, all within a few 100,000 kilometers, can share not just media and messages, but cultural events, marketplaces, even public services. Think of them not as floating towns, but as orbital cities, or counties, or even nations. And finally, there's gravitational practicality. Keeping stations near one another helps stabilize their orbits, especially around shared points like Lagrange zones, planetary rings, or artificial masses like tethered asteroids. Their proximity allows them to piggyback on common orbital mechanics or shared anchor structures, making station keeping far less energy intensive. A tether connecting two stations, each just one side of a stable Lagrange point, can tug on each other to keep stable, where by themselves they are not quite stable, and doing so widen the useful size of such rare and useful locations. Indeed, as we explored a couple weeks back in our Orbital Ecologies episode, the very nature of both humans and space habitats is, the former wanting wider community connections, while the latter tends to be more practical when smaller, and tends to favor this sort of tether-connected conglomeration. It's no coincidence that I opened that episode with a narrative vignette from the perspective of a conductor on an interhabitat tether train. In short, the lonely satellite is a transitional phase. The future lies in community, clusters of worlds forged not by continental drift or tectonic upheaval, but by design, cooperation, and imagination. A galactic suburbia, or perhaps a galactic Venice, connected by cable instead of canal, and humming with life. And we must be mindful of just how empty space remains, even in a fully built Dyson swarm. Even if we had the raw materials to entirely englobe a star in space habitats, they would likely orbit in a broad band at least 5% closer or farther from Earth's distance from the Sun, a shell about 10 million miles wide. It would take roughly a quadrillion O'Neill cylinders to achieve such an englobement, and they were evenly distributed throughout this roughly 4 trillion cubic kilometer shell. The average distance between each station would be about 1,600 kilometers, or 1,000 miles. That's a lot of elbow room for a community of perhaps 1 million, and while tethering several habitats together would increase that spacing elsewhere, it would often make far more sense to have neighboring stations just a few cylinder lengths apart, close enough to easily share power and communication, or even water and air via pipes, to a reserve or recycling hub in emergencies. Nor would every habitat be an O'Neill cylinder, any more than every city is a metropolis. We expect habitats of many shapes, sizes, and purposes, from nature preserves to suburbs and urban centers, as well as numerous ancillary facilities, factories, docks, shipyards, and sprawling solar collectors, thinner than paper but larger than all the habitats combined. Farms, too, often built along similar lines but with simpler or more cost-effective construction. Habitat types and roles within clusters. Not every space habitat will look like the classic O'Neill cylinder, long, gleaming, and forested within. Just as cities contain neighborhoods, districts, parks, factories, and farms, habitat clusters will be a mosaic of diverse structures, each serving its own role in a larger whole. The image of identical spinning cylinders orbing side by side might make for clean geometry, but reality will favor functional variety. You will have residential cores, sprawling habitats tailored for human comfort and daily life. These might resemble garden suburbs under domed skies or glittering vertical ecopolises that blend art and automation. Some will spin for artificial gravity, others might float weightless, home to those who prefer or are adapted to zero-G living. Some will split the difference to be low gravity, some will be compact single-family habitats, others vast arcologies housing millions. Then there are utility habitats, space factories, power plants, dry docks, and data centers. Structures that don't need parks or schools, just raw function. Some might run on sunlight beamed from kilometers away, or tap fusion or black hole generators. Others may operate autonomously, with only a handful of human technicians or robots. Entire clusters might include habitats optimized for growing crops under alien conditions, agricultural rings with perfectly tuned light and humidity for every row of hydroponic plants. These space farms can be built lean and efficient, stripped down to the necessities, and connected via tethers to the more luxurious living habitats. Wildlife will have its place too, not just pets and pollinators, but whole nature preserves floating among the stars. These range from microhabitats preserving a single endangered species to grand sanctuaries like New Geauga 6 BC, designed to replicate the landscape of Ice Age Ohio in exhaustive detail. Other habitats, like the Great Congo-McKendree Cylinder, might span thousands of square kilometers, supporting entire ecosystems and megafauna once on the brink of extinction. Some preserves even house resurrected species, like the mammoths and saber-tooths of Siberia Park, their icy world fed by tethered space farms trucking fodder and nutrients. Habitats will be cultural canvases too. Just as neighborhoods differ in architectural style and rhythm of life, habitats might emulate historical eras, alien aesthetics, or entirely novel cultural movements, from Victorian-themed stations to Edo-period Japanese cylinders, from classic utopias to cyberpunk metropolises suspended beneath aurora-lit ceilings. Each habitat can express an idealized vision of life, history, or even fantasy. Some will be open to tourists, others strict intentional communities where residents sign lifestyle contracts more demanding than any HOA could imagine. Nor are these clusters entirely sealed. Many will include hybrid transit habitats, floating ports for interstellar travelers, or mobile habitats that drift between stations. Some of these mobile units may plug into larger structures, orbital cul-de-sacs where nomadic vessels can dock, expand, and refuel. Others might be long-haul caravans, transporting goods and cultures between the stars. Together, these diverse structures form more than a cluster, they form a living organism, a symphony of engineering and ecology, shaped by the needs, dreams, and experiments of countless cultures, each habitat a world, and each cluster a civilization in miniature. Mobility and modularity, the politics of movable worlds. And here's the awesome part. These habitats are not static. They can dock and undock, merge and part ways. A sprawling conglomeration might look like a three-dimensional mesh, dense and glittering like a web of stars, with solar panels arrayed on the sunward side and vast heat radiators stretched out into the dark. Together they form not merely an archipelago, but a nation in space, a true constellation of civilization. But unlike nations on Earth, locked in the unyielding geography of mountains, rivers, and oceans, these orbital nations float free. A new habitat can join the cluster, bringing its people and culture with it, or it can leave, peacefully detaching and charting a course toward a new star or quieter orbit. No armies mustered, no borders bled for. This freedom of motion is transformative. On Earth, land is fixed and scarce, and that scarcity often fuels conflict. When neighbors clash, there's no way to simply pick up and move your farmland, your factories, your family graves. If you have a farm or a yard, you must convince your neighbors to sell it if you want to expand them. Political, cultural, and religious tensions fester in place because the place itself cannot change. In space, property is portable. When the ground beneath you is not fixed, disputes take different forms. A discontented habitat does not need to declare war to find freedom. It can disconnect from the local power grid and commerce lanes, thank its neighbors for their hospitality, and quietly thrust away, becoming the seat of a new cluster, a splinter community setting sail into the stars with fresh vision. Others may follow, some may one day return. In space, migration and succession are not upheavals, they are a natural part of the orbital life cycle. They are a natural part of the orbital life cycle in a free society. Even when two space nations don't get along, they don't have to share a border, they can simply change their relative positions. And if they happen to share a static orbital path, such as the same ring or ellipse, most conglomerations will only intersect once or twice a year, passing near each other briefly before continuing on their very different routes. These meetings are opportunities, not for conflict but for exchange, a time to trade, to visit, to celebrate shared roots, or to move. An individual, a family, or even a whole community might decide to drift to a new home, one better aligned with their values or vision. Indeed, they might buy commercial advertisements on each other to encourage tourism or migration. This fluidity encourages tolerance. When departure is an option, coercion becomes less necessary. Diversity becomes less threatening when every culture can quite literally carve out its own space, its own habitat, orbiting beside others or far apart as it chooses. It also creates a pressure valve for innovation. In any large society, progress can stall under the weight of consensus. But in a modular civilization, a radical idea doesn't have to wait for widespread approval. It can be tested in its own habitat, and if it thrives, others may copy it. A future renaissance might begin not in a hidden corner of Florence, but in a single habitat that dared to dream different and floated just far enough from the mainstream to give its ideas room to grow. Even diplomacy changes when nations are not bound to borders but connected by choice. Treaties aren't about fixed lines on a map, but mutual agreements to stay connected, agreements that can be revised, renewed, or respectfully rejected without bloodshed. In the cosmic future, power may not come from controlling land, but from attracting habitats, from offering something worth orbiting beside, and that, at its heart, is the true promise of space habitats that we've been exploring on the show for the past 11 years, and that visionaries like Gerard K. O'Neill and organizations like the National Space Society, which I've had the honor of leading these past few years as president, have been championing for over half a century. It's not simply more land for humanity, but a better chance at a peaceful coexistence on it. A civilization tethered together by shared bonds of friendship and cooperation, not coercion or desperation. Tethers, transit, and shared infrastructure. In the vacuum of space, roads as we know them do not exist, but connections still matter. Space habitat clusters may float freely, but they will not be adrift. They will be tethered, physically, economically, energetically, and those tethers will form the backbone of civilization in orbit. Physical tethers might begin as simple umbilicals, power cables, water lines, or rail tracks between two nearby stations, but scale them up and you get megastructural marvels. Maglev lines stretched across kilometers of emptiness, supporting cargo pods or even passenger trains moving silently from one worldlet to another. Tubular vacuum trains running on solar power and gyroscopic stabilization might crisscross a cluster the way subways do beneath Earth's cities. Tethers can also provide orbital stabilization. Two habitats connected by a cable and carefully balanced across the Lagrange point or orbital ring can pull each other into greater stability, extending the practical lifespan of their orbits and making them resistant to minor perturbations. Think of them like space's version of flying buttresses, architectural solutions scaled up to orbital mechanics, and this may be scaled up to include not two habitats tethered together, but 2,000. Beyond cables, shared infrastructure will likely be everywhere. Massive solar arrays, thin as gossamer, might drift above a cluster, beaming power wirelessly to habitats below using lasers or microwaves, or even superconducting cables. These energy platforms could stretch for thousands of square kilometers, larger than the habitats they support, and reposition themselves to chase the sun or align with fusion relays. Waste recycling and resource reprocessing might also be centralized, especially for smaller habs aimed at families. Rather than each habitat developing its own closed-loop systems, clusters could share dedicated waste hubs, automated habitats where matter is sorted, sterilized, recycled, and remanufactured. From these nodes, purified air and water might flow back along the same pipes that export fertilizer and waste heat. Transit between habitats won't be just for goods either. People will move, too, on tethers, in shuttles, or in personal space pods, not much more complicated than a modern car. Larger clusters may include public transit systems, with schedules and terminals like an orbital bus depot, but for those who can afford them, spacecraft homes, personal vessels with docking permissions, could allow nomadic lifestyles even within a relatively fixed community. And it isn't just about material transit. Shared data networks, virtual worlds, and interlinked simulations will stitch these clusters together as much as physical tethers do. Within milliseconds, inhabitants can move between digital campuses, theaters, or meeting rooms, even if the real-world habitats housing them are kilometers apart. These digital infrastructures might be run by decentralized AIs or mutual interest cooperatives, and access to them might define membership in a cluster as much as physical location does. And just as roads gave rise to roadside inns, stores, and gas stations, space tetherways might host refueling nodes, repair drones, or even little rotating rest stops for passing craft. We can picture a civilization that isn't just defined by its habitats, but by its links, by the pathways of trade, trust, and travel that hold its worlds together. In space, it's not enough to build a world, you need to wire it in. Shapes of clusters and dynamic conglomerations. So if space habitat clusters are free to grow, shrink, rearrange, or even migrate, what do they actually look like? Well, that depends. In a word, everything. Some might resemble a daisy chain, a series of O'Neill cylinders connected end to end, spinning in tandem, linked by magnetic tethers or structural bridges. These could be aligned like pearls on a string, or arranged with deliberate curvature, forming vast loops, spirals, or even orbital rings around a planet, moon, or artificial anchor. Each could be its own neighborhood, theme park, research outpost, or farming commune. If one habitat needs repairs or a cultural reset, it can be undocked and replaced like a train car or a modular servo blade. Others might adopt a honeycomb or cellular pattern, a tight hexagonal lattice where each habitat is surrounded by neighbors on all sides, exchanging power, goods, and people across high-speed transit tubes. These are the dense humming metropolises of orbital civilization, and between their nodes we might find shared parks, communal greenhouses, or zero-G recreation zones, free-floating arcades and atriums drifting in the void, used by all. Then there are net-shaped superstructures, thousands of habitats connected by cable in loose three-dimensional meshes that can flex and shift like scaffolding or tendrils. These might be wrapped around massive utility hubs, fusion plants, manufacturing forges, or gravitational anchors like mined-out asteroids. Their interstitial space can be filled with solar arrays, massive farms, or thermal radiators. They can look chaotic at first glance, but a closer look reveals hidden geometry, logic, and purpose, like a coral reef grown from human intention. Some clusters may be built as stars themselves, spheres of habitats arranged around a central energy core, like a miniature Dyson swarm inside a single superstructure. These megastructures, possibly built deep in space and far from stars, would have internal weather systems, shared lighting controls, and even manage day-night cycles for each face of the cluster, giving residents the illusion of sun and sky. Others might not float freely in space, but instead be carved into rock or ice. Large asteroids or comets, hollowed out in vast networks of chambers and tunnels. These immense bodies provide not only the raw materials to fuel their local economies, but also natural protection from radiation, micrometeors, and even detection, ideal for those seeking concealment or defense. For similar reasons, some habitats might encase themselves in solid shells, ranging from thin layers no thicker than tinfoil or solar panels to massive barriers as tough as battleship armor. These outer superstructures help contain drifting debris, which, while moving slow relative to the habitat, could become deadly when intersecting another trajectory at high speed. Such shells might be layered, thin-walled balloons filled with shielding materials like water, ice, or hydrogen, which are not only abundant and affordable, but also highly effective at absorbing radiation. The outermost surface could be lined with solar panels on the sunward side and heat radiators on the dark side, interspersed with access points and communication arrays. And still others might go full arcology, solid megahabitats kilometers thick, layered like giant beehives, with whole ecosystems stacked vertically. Picture an O'Neill cylinder not as a single living space, but as a layer stacked on them like floors in a skyscraper, sharing spin and power, each with its own biome or climate. But perhaps the most important feature of these clusters is that they are not fixed. In the way that a medieval city evolved organically, walls added, suburbs growing, castles rebuilt, so too would space habitat conglomerations shift over time. A science cluster might gradually attract related industries and institutions until it becomes a sprawling mega-university arcology. Others may evolve into cultural mosaics, as habitats inspired by specific aesthetics or historical periods gather in themed microclusters, whether emulating ancient Japan, the Roman Empire, or entirely fictional realms. Some might be deliberate homages to the past, others playful reinterpretations, fusing nostalgia with futurism in stylized forms that reflect both tradition and taste. A region struck by a solar flare or micrometeor storm might temporarily fragment and relocate to safer orbits. A cluster afflicted by catastrophe, external attack, or internal strife might dissolve temporarily, its habitats dispersing to neighboring conglomerations. Instead of emergency workers and supplies rushing into a disaster zone, as we do today, the afflicted population itself might move, spreading the impact across systems better equipped to help. Relief isn't just deployed to the crisis is redistributed to the relief infrastructure, ensuring no single area becomes overwhelmed. This dynamic structure allows for growth and adaptation. It also makes these orbital societies more resistant to stagnation. You don't just move away when things get bad, you shift orbits, add a new habitat, rearrange the cluster structure. It's not unlike urban planning. If your downtown gets too crowded, you can literally build more cities, or send part of it to a new orbit altogether. You don't have to invoke eminent domain to slice some farmer's land in half for a freeway, you just move it over. And if that farmer wants to expand, they can just add on. It is possible to extend a cylinder or ring habitat, or simply add another smaller one nearby. Even more exotic shapes are possible if we go beyond spin gravity and adopt clock tech, technologies that allow artificial gravity, massive force fields, or even distributed habitats using inertial dampeners or field suspension. In those cases, the only real limit is imagination and energy budget. But even with just known physics, the shape of the future's living spaces will be wild, beautiful, and ever-changing. Not rigid castles in space, but blooming cities of light. For a lot of the 20th century, when concepts like these space habitats were being developed, there was a fear that we would soon overpopulate our world and need them for space. Growth rates have dropped since then, and even gone negative in some places, so that can seem less of a problem. And yet medical pathways to much longer lives and even biological immortality seem to be emerging fast, which may increase population growth again. Fiction shows us a lot of long-lived characters and their lives, but rarely do we see much consideration of what the society and economy of a very long-lived civilization would be like. My latest monthly exclusive episode explores the economics of immortality. What happens when the rarest thing in the universe, time itself, is no longer scarce? From medical nanobots to mind uploading, we dive into how immortality may shape the societies of the future. That's out now on Nebula, the largest creator-owned streaming platform where every episode of SFIA is available early and ad-free, and where I've been posting full-length exclusives like this one every month for years, along with extended editions, bonus content, and amazing originals from other creators. Get a lifetime membership for just $300 and unlock everything forever, or use my link, go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur, to get 40% off, $36 a year. That's 12 months for the price of 7. Scan the QR code or click the link below to start watching now. Head to go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur to join and start watching the exclusive content like The Economics of Immortality. Digital ecosystems and cultural identity. In space, your address may orbit the sun, but your true neighborhood might exist in the clouds. As habitats link into vast data networks, a parallel civilization will flourish in cyberspace, unbounded by gravity, atmosphere, or radiation shielding. Entire digital cities may emerge, layered atop their physical counterparts, offering shared virtual spaces for work, leisure, education, and governance. These virtual layers become both extensions and expressions of identity. A habitat's cultural allegiance might lie more with its online polity than its physical neighbors, and visiting a neighboring cluster could feel less like crossing a border and more like logging into another planet's forum. Yet because of light speed delays, most of a Dyson swarm will be hours apart by signal lag. In such a setting, clusters tied up to maintain real-time communication gain a distinct advantage, another compelling reason to form close-knit conglomerates in the void. Default sprawl-level neocylinders 1,000 miles apart, a light second of back-and-forth signal lag gives you a radius of about 90 habitats and about 3 million habitats in that value. That might sound like a lot, probably a few hundred billion people in fact, but even at this distance things are getting laggy, and even just spacing these habitats down to 20 miles apart, which leaves everything still mostly empty space, will let you increase your habitat density by a factor of 125,000, potentially allowing many quadrillions to live inside a conglomeration close enough to speak comfortably and zoom each other real time. Economics and trade in habitat constellations. Economics in space won't just be about scarcity, it'll be about coordination. Clusters can share labor, resources, and expertise, forming cooperative economies on a galactic scale. A single cluster might house habitats that specialize in biotech, zero-gravity manufacturing, or digital artistry, each exporting their goods or services via physical shipping or data transmission. You might send refined metals by rail tether, but also license virtual fashion lines or AI-tended garden designs across the solar system. Some habitats might run entirely on reputation or credit within a community trust network. Others could operate as charter cities with their own currencies, legal codes, and tax systems. Trade isn't just physical, it's cultural, legal, and mimetic, spreading norms and novelties across the stars. And in such an environment, the richest habitat might not be the biggest or brightest, but the one that attracts the most collaboration. Let us keep in mind that a few thousand habitats can easily share combined services, like a Supreme Court or a College of Medicine with specialists in thousands of disciplines, if they're part of a single conglomeration. Spread too far apart, though, and communication slows to a crawl. It becomes an email and message board environment, not one where real-time conversations or live collaborations are practical. In contrast, travel within a tightly clustered conglomeration is fast and affordable. You just hopping on a train or piloting your own personal spaceship across a few dozen kilometers of open space. Education and intergenerational planning. Clusters also enable unique opportunities for education and long-term planning. A habitat doesn't just raise children, it raises civilizations. Entire learning habitats might exist where students rotate through different cluster modules to learn agriculture, engineering, politics, or art from people who live them. Some clusters may even practice long-range social planning, where habitats are built with the expectation that they'll split off after a few generations to form new branches, like educational seed pods, that eventually blossom into full cultural entities. Then they attach an engine to that space habitat and fire it off into the interstellar void. Indeed, whole clusters of space habitats could strap on engines. Spaceships moving in interstellar space together view each other all as in relative stop and can connect by tethers too. The moving space outside is basically just a perpetual galactic wind, which is already the case in space anyway. But back to schools. Because many orbital societies will also enjoy longer lifespans thanks to biotech, automation, and medical advances, education won't be front-loaded in youth. Lifelong learning may be the norm, and clusters will offer not just schools, but continual reinvention. People can start families later too if they wish. They're not trying to outrun a biological clock, or get the career rolling strongly so you can fit one in before retirement age. Security and conflict management. Of course, any civilization, however ideal, must wrestle with questions of conflict and safety. Habitat clusters might employ rotating civic defense duties, sharing emergency response and peacekeeping roles across the collective. Others may follow mutual defense pacts like orbital versions of NATO. Some might adopt non-violence as a principle, relying on physical distance and transparency to deter hostility. Others might share defense contracts with megastates. And just as city-states once hired third-party mediators or mercenary forces, some clusters may delegate security to neutral AI-administered defense networks, ensuring that no single node accumulates too much military power. The key is that violence becomes less efficient than movement. Why conquer a neighbor if they can simply drift away, taking their value and their warning stories with them? A Tale of Unity. I'd originally intended this episode to continue our 2025 narrative theme, picking up where life in 2525 AD and orbital ecologies left off, with another Canterbury Tales-inspired vignette, The Commissioner's Tale. The idea was to explore how space habitat conglomerations might evolve politically, not into sovereign empires, but into something more familiar, states composed of counties and districts. Part of the inspiration came from back home here in Ohio, where counties serve as key administrative divisions and are typically run by a board of 3 or more commissioners. For those who didn't know, I've been very involved in local government since I left the US Army, which I enjoy, whereas I actively dislike federal and global politics. There aren't any physics or spaceships involved in townships, villages, or local elections, and I am still chairman of our board of elections. But the origins of this show go back to me missing the chance to talk about science and science fiction, and I've always had a fascination with different ways communities structure and organize themselves. The problem with writing the vignette was that one of my closest friends is one of those county commissioners, and I kept subconsciously writing him into the story, so much so that I finally scrapped the vignette altogether and decided to just talk about the concept directly. It is also an interesting aspect of local governments that you often have chunks of counties wanting to break off to be a new county, and regularly have a city or village annexing a bit of unincorporated township around them, and I think these might be better models for what happens in the future, and also presents a much wider example, especially in modern times, of how community mergers or divisions would take place. In a lot of science fiction, we see a small colony, maybe tens of thousands or even a few million people, declaring full independence and forming a completely sovereign nation, often standing toe-to-toe not with a typical country, but with an Earth-spanning superpower. You get all of Mars or all of the Moon breaking away from Earth entirely. I've always found that a bit dubious, especially when it comes to orbital colonies. After all, you're still right there at Earth, just a bit further up. At most, you're a new island or continent, not a new planet. In terms of scale, the comparison breaks down even further. Your average O'Neill cylinder, at the large end of typical space habitat designs, is more akin to a county than a country. A Stanford torus, more like a township, and in Ohio those often default to 5 by 5 mile or 8 by 8 kilometer squares, so it seems far more plausible that some American-built colonies might not be angling for sovereignty at all, but for statehood, as part of a larger conglomeration of space counties forming a new state. Or maybe you've got a cluster of habitats in geostationary orbit over the equator, aligning with the North American West Coast. One might be founded by Californians, another by folks from Oregon, and another from British Columbia. Rather than forming a new nation, they might apply to become counties of their home states, or a regional district under Canadian provincial law, and some habitats might not even spiral to that level. Maybe one just wants to be a ward or district of Los Angeles or San Francisco, where they serve as an economic port at the top of a non-equatorial space elevator. Needless to say, that kind of civic integration seems a lot more grounded, literally and figuratively, than sudden declarations of planetary independence. Religion, ritual, and meaning. Spiritual life in space may flourish, not fade. With habitats able to isolate or interconnect as desired, religious communities can construct sacred environments far beyond what is feasible on Earth. You cannot take your tribal lands with you to space, but you can make new ones and migrate them if your neighbors start to eye them up. A cylinder might be an orbital monastery with seasons precisely attuned to ancient calendars, or a mighty temple or medieval cathedral scaled up to megastructural scale. These structures might serve not just the faithful, but tourists, scholars, and seekers from faraway orbits. One of our biggest issues with post-scarcity civilization is finding meaning and purpose. and while many might pursue secular approaches, for them and those on these many paths, space can offer a place to set up your promised lands. The long view, legacy, and civilization. The real power of space habitat clusters isn't just expansion, it's continuity. On Earth, civilizations rise and fall with access to land, water, and stability. In space, we decouple survival from geography. A failing habitat is not a dying empire, it's a node in need of a reboot or a new alignment. As clusters persist and evolve, they become testaments to human adaptability. 100 generations from now, someone might walk through a habitat built in your era, their feet echoing down the same alloy halls, their voice calling out in a language that evolved from yours. That is the legacy we are building, a civilization unmoored from the crust of planets, but anchored in human will. Closing reflections. We often think of space as the final frontier, but for many of our descendants, it will be the first home. These clustered habitats, humming and drifting through the void, are not backups or exiles, they are fulfillment, the culmination of a billion dreams to leave the cradle without abandoning the warmth of firelight and community. If we can build 100,000 Earths, we can also build 10 million new ways to live, and we can keep them connected by tether and trust, by trade and tolerance, that we're not just surviving in space, we are thriving. Because in the end, it's not just about building homes in the stars, it's about building us. So as we celebrate the 11th anniversary of Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur, and my own 45th birthday this week, I want to thank you for being part of this journey, one that began with our very first look at megastructures, and now brought us to these grand visions of clustered space civilizations. If you'd like to help keep this channel exploring the stars each week, consider becoming a patron on Patreon, or joining as a YouTube member. Your support truly means the world to us, sometimes quite literally. Thanks to you, we've been able to keep sharing these visions of awe and inspiration during times when many folks could use exactly that, and I plan to keep doing so for years to come. Looking ahead, next Thursday we'll be diving into orbital foundries and zero-G manufacturing, exploring how space could become the ultimate factory floor. Then, to wrap up the month, we'll venture into exploring the multiverse, from branching timelines to alternate realities. So make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay up to date. And until then, as always, thanks for watching, and have a great week.